morning, WASBO. Happy Friday. Happy Friday in the summer. There is nothing better than a Friday in the summer. Thank you for joining us this morning. Welcome to Money Talks, which is WASBO's monthly webinar, where we talk about all things related to school funding and school finance. I'm Mike Berry, Executive Director of WASBO, and I am joined as per usual by my co-host for Money Talks, Brian Adesso from
Morning, Mike.
School District. Hey, Brian.
Looking forward to the session.
Yeah, Brian is also the WASBO treasurer, in addition to his duties in Menasha. And today our special guest is Ann Chapman, who is the WASBO's research director. Good morning, Ann.
Good morning, everybody.
All right. Well, if you've never been to Money Talks webinar before, we do these in sort of two parts. The first part, which is a constant, is just a quick review of some of the big financial sort of indicators that influence and affect school districts. And the second part is a deep dive into a special topic for the, for that month. So for this month of June, it's sort of a special arrangement. We're going to go very quickly through the slides about the financial marketplace because we really want to get on to the deep dive topic, which is state budget. So I should point out a few things before we dive into the actual material. First is that please use the Q&A function, not the chat, if you wish to submit a question. I should also say that we try to move these things along and take about 45 minutes max for these webinars. We know you're busy and you got to get on to other things. We might not be able to address your question live during the webinar, but if we cannot, we will certainly take it offline and get back to you. So again, it's Q&A and not the chat function, right? So what else have we got? We are recording this session this morning, and later today, both the video recording and the slide deck that you're going to see will be available on the WASBO website. Just go to wasbo.com /Money Talks. wasbo.com /.
Mike, I just want to add that that's not usual, that we usually don't record these. So we give our partners the liberty to.
Yeah, we normally don't record these because the financial information comes and goes and changes so quickly that it has a pretty short shelf life. So that now we are recording because so many people are interested in the school business offices around the state as to just what's going on with state budget. So we thought it was a good idea to record it, but no extra pressure, right, Brian, on you and I and Ann? Whatever mistakes we make are going to be recorded for posterity here. So we have to try to raise our game over the normal Money Talks. Finally, the big disclaimer, everything that we have to say this morning, especially about the state budget, is based on the best information that we have. We're obviously not through the entire process. It's not like the governor has finished his work on all of this stuff. So we have to just say up front that things could change, and so be aware of that. Everyone still has to stay on this and do their due diligence between now and I suppose the late October levy adoptions, right? So we've got a long way to go. Like even last night, there was work being done at the state capitol. So some things may change. So yeah, I think with that, we're going to get into the financial section. We've got about 6 or 7 slides that we typically show just to keep whoever it is in your school district, your CFO, business manager, whatever the title might be, aware of the sort of big picture financial issues. Often these are questions that board members will ask, and it's just good to have this information. So we're going to get started with that in just a second. Okay, yeah, my screen went to sleep there for a second. Okay, so let's get going. So the first one that we typically show is the 30-year fixed mortgage rate. This is the housing statistic. Bottom line is that mortgages, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life, you need to know that 30-year mortgage is going up, up, up. It's almost to 7%. And the key point for school business offices is that affordability is a real problem right now in housing and slowing down home sales. It has effect on enrollment, right? So be aware that that combination of high interest rates and a short supply of homes means that the housing market is really slow right now. And if you're looking for subdivisions to fill up, if you're in a fast-growing school district, or if you're looking for a lot of turnover, it's pretty tough conditions for that right now. Okay, so that's 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Consumer Price Index. This is as of June 13th. I want to thank our friends at PMA, by the way. Eric Cass and his team at PMA put all this information together for us. So thanks, guys. The CPI, as of the middle of June, you can see it's been falling. The all items is down to about 4%. Of course, this is different than the CPI that often gets referenced in terms of school district compensation and collective bargaining and so on, which is a CPI look back. That's that 8%, that ceiling for contracts that are being negotiated effective July 1 of 23. So there's this big gap between the 8%, which again is a look back, and current conditions, which have been dropping. I think that difficulty is that when you're talking face to face with your teachers and other groups, they're saying, hey, 8% is the ceiling. How about 8%, right? And it's a fair argument, but school districts are not necessarily going to be in a position to fund those kinds of increases. But the good thing is that the trend is going down. Okay, so CPI. What are you doing with your money? So I love this slide. This is for all the business managers in the state who have responsibility for investing school district resources. This is just a example of the most common investment options available to school districts. You can see like WISC is on here, which is the Wisconsin Investment Consortium. What would you do with CDs or US Treasuries? Those are very viable options. And as you can see, this is an environment where you should be earning around 5% or maybe a little bit more on your idle cash. So those numbers are certainly very different than they were over the last couple of years. And there's an opportunity there, right, to pick up some non-tax levy revenue. So you need to be on that, right?
Mike, even going into this year, I was looking at my budget amount. It was at 17,000, and my current year-to-date activity is at 250,000, and I still have one more month to go. So it's a pleasant surprise.
You're going to look like a hero.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're going to point this out to the Menasha School Board when you're presenting, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully you were not investing in like soybean futures with school district money.
No, crypto.
So well done, Brian. All right. So, it wasn't always this way for a long time, right? No matter what you were trying to do with your idle cash, investing was, there was just nothing there. And this chart shows that, starting back in February of 20, you just couldn't earn, and money was free. So you couldn't earn anything on it. And the reason we spend so much time on this is that for a long time, you didn't pay a penalty for ignoring your investments because you couldn't earn anything anyway. But now you do. Now you're missing an opportunity. And you can see how that opportunity has really developed since early 22. So be on that, get on that, pay attention to it. If you are issuing debt or thinking about issuing debt right now, typically not a super high volume time for the school districts in the state. But there was some activity here in June on the municipal side. You can see they're all municipals, right? We're a tech college. So the good news here is that there's still a lot of active bidding for these debt issuances. Right? You'd hate to have a big bond sale and have only one or two bidders show up, right? Because it's going to cost you. But it looks like there's at least, as of June, still a lot of appetite in the market to buy this Wisconsin municipal debt. Again, if you get 6 bidders, you're going to get a pretty good price, a pretty good market price for your offering. So that's good news. If you're an issuer, it's still a really good time to be issuing, right? I mean, historically, if you're issuing debt under 5%, you're going to be doing pretty well. So while construction costs are high, borrowing costs are low. It seems like we can never get those two things to line up. But if you're working with your school board, you can say, you know, if we're borrowing soon, we're borrowing at a good time. Okay. There's PMA's disclosure. Everyone gets 3 seconds to read it. Ready, go. Okay, good. Well done, guys. On to our state budget conversation. This is what we really wanted to get to today with our research director, Ann Chapman. You want to say hello again, Ann?
Hi, everybody.
All right. Well, here we go. Let's just dive right in to what we can't present everything. We're just trying to get at the things that we think are most important to Wisconsin school district business offices. So we're going to start with the revenue limits and the general aid increase. So as this slide shows, the increase in the revenue limit is $325 per pupil, beginning in the 23-24 school year, followed by a subsequent bump, another $325. The reason we put general aids on this slide as well is that someone's going to have to pay if school districts want to use that $325 revenue limit authority. And it's going to have an impact on your tax levy, right? So ideally, if the state would put a lot of money into the equalization aid pool, that might help offset the increases that you're seeing, or that you'll likely see from the per pupil increase. I thought that the increase in the equalization aid pool, $154 million, was actually pretty meh overall. I was looking for them to do more there, but it was really just sort of a 3 or 4% increase at the most. So I think a lot of school districts, especially down in the CISA 1, CISA 2 area that were very active in lobbying, we're looking for increases in the revenue limit that were substantially higher than the 325, followed by another 325, right? Okay, so that's just really basic stuff. I want to get into the low revenue ceiling because that addresses both the 325 and the low revenue ceiling. So why don't we just go ahead and dive into that? So this was, we've got, I think there are approximately 120 districts in the state that were in the low revenue ceiling bucket as we knew it when it was at a $10,000 threshold. And now there's many more because the threshold moves up to 11,000, right? So, let's lead with the good news, right? The good news for Wisconsin school districts that are in low revenue world is that the increase in the revenue limit formula for low revenue goes from 10,000 to 11 and then stays there. I suppose it could increase in the future, but the key is that it doesn't go away after a year, right? So this is going to allow school districts a lot more revenue limit authority, especially those that are hovering around 10,000 or just above that, right? So a big win for low revenue ceiling districts. There is a little catch in this, right? Kind of an obscure piece of the legislative landscape, which is 2017 Wisconsin Act 141. This is, you probably may have heard of this at your regionals, but this is the act that says if you're, and Ann, I'm sure you're gonna give me a better definition, but if your school district went out for an operating referendum and lost, then you've been disqualified from taking advantage of the revenue limit increase.
For 3 years. Yep, for 3 years.
For 3 more years, yeah. Okay.
If you subsequently go to referendum and win, it sort of resets the clock. So you can still go to referendum again. You just can't take the low revenue limit until you win a referendum or until 3 years go by. Yeah, there's only about 19 districts that are probably going to be affected by that, but that's, I mean, still a good number of districts.
Yeah, the one that's closest to me geographically is Fort Atkinson, which lost operating referendum this past spring, right?
Although they'll be able to take advantage of the 325, so they'll get up above 11,000 just through the regular revenue limit adjustment. So there's a few that fall into this category that in practice won't be affected because the 325 will bump them up.
Great. Let's take a look at how that works, right? Nice transition. So here's the way the low revenue ceiling actually sort of interacts with the revenue limit going forward. So this is your formula, and then we'll show you some examples. And the order here is important. So let's do it. You go to your 22-23 revenue limit worksheet, you divide line 9, right, into line 6, and that produces your base revenue per member. Then you add the 325 to your base revenue per member. And then the third step of the process, if the sum of A and B is less than 11,000, then you get an additional amount sufficient to reach 11,000. That number is going to vary depending on your circumstances, right? Or if the sum of the amount is greater than 11, which is like we just mentioned with Fort Atkinson, then you use the summed amount. You want to see what it looks like in some real examples? All right, let's give this a try. Whoop. Okay, here's some examples. Okay. So this is just a way of putting numbers to the formula that we just described. And we have 4 scenarios here: districts A, B, C, and D. And I think you'll get the hang of this pretty quickly. So from your 22-23 RLW, or revenue limit worksheet, I was running out of room, so I had to abbreviate. Line 9 divided by line 6. So that creates your base revenue per member. So let's take, it was at $10,000. The first thing that gets applied is the 325. So then going from left to right, their adjusted base revenue per member becomes $10,325 now for this upcoming year. Then are they at 11,000? Clearly not. They are allowed then an additional increase to get up to 11,000, which in this case would be $675 more dollars of revenue limit authority. And through those 2 steps, they reach $11,000 of revenue limit authority for 23-24. In the second year of the biennium, they would get the 325 that everybody else gets, right? So big opportunity there for districts that are at $10,000 now. But a lot of work to be done there too, right? Communicating with your superintendent, with your board, running your July 1 aid estimate when it comes out on July 1, figuring out what your tax levy impact is. How can you make this, how can you take advantage? How can you communicate on that? Very interesting work coming up. Let's take a look at B. This district had more revenue limit authority going into the year. Let's say 10,500. They get to apply the $325 first. It takes them to 10,825. They too get an additional increase to get up to 11,000. It's obviously not as much of an increase. $175 more gets them to 11. And like District A, the second year of the biennium, they have the option to go up to 11,325. School District C. We picked this one intentionally. Yeah.
We do have a few questions in the chat.
Okay, let me get let me get through this chart, and then we're going to pause. Let's do C. This is the this is the key number, right? 10,675. Let's say that was your revenue, your base revenue coming into the new school year. You get your 325, and suddenly you're at 11,000. You are ineligible for any increase beyond that because you've hit 11,000. Your maximum authority is 11,000. Next year, 11,325, meaning year 2 of the biennium. And one last one. This is Oconomowoc, actually. I think I'm going to show you this in a second. They're at 10,850. An allowed increase of 325 gets them to 11,175. They are ineligible for anything more because we're already over 11. So their authority is 11,175. Next year, 11,500. So hang on there, Ryan. And we will. Yeah, I just want to show you where those numbers are coming from. If you're looking at your 22-23 revenue limit, and I mentioned Oconomowoc, that's where I stole these numbers from. Line 9 is the revenue limit with exceptions. In their case, 56,716,000, a little red arrow there, and it's divided by line 6, which is their current membership, and that's how you get to 10,850. So that's where you go to find these numbers. If you're already looking at your 23-24 revenue limit worksheet, you can find the same numbers. They're at a different spot because it's current year information, but I recommend starting here and making sure that those numbers are accurate. Okay. So any comments from Brian or Ann? And if not, then we'll entertain a question or two before we move off of this.
No, I'm looking at some of the questions. I don't have any extra comments. We could jump into the questions.
Okay. If you think there's one that is representative of a large audience question, happy to take it on.
And I don't know, do you know when the low revenue ceiling was last adjusted? And that would be a fascinating question to answer.
Oh, good question. I don't have that off the top of my head. It's been 10,000.
It has been adjusted. It was, I might be going back 2 budgets where it was adjusted like multiple times in small increments. Yeah, I remember when it was like 9,400, then 95 and 96.
I don't have it. I can find it, but probably not quickly enough right now. I don't remember.
Okay, we'll find it.
I think in 2021 it was 9,700, and then the next biennium it went up to 10,000.
Yeah.
There's a question about whether it applies if there's a question about whether it applies if you lost an operational referendum that was tied to a building, and that's true. It does not apply in that case, if that makes sense. So if you went to operating referendum to support a new building and you lost for that reason, then that doesn't disqualify you from the low revenue ceiling provision.
And I believe SAA put out a list.
Yeah.
Of impacted districts.
Yep. If you go to the SAA blog, there's a pretty nice clean list of the districts that are affected by the low revenue district, and it even highlights in green the ones that are technically affected, but they'll get bumped up above 11,000 just with the 325 regular revenue limit adjustment.
Okay.
And then there was a question if they increase to 11,000 the first year, like our example show, they can get the 325 in the second year. It's not 11,000 for both years, but you would have to go up to 11,000 that first year.
Right.
Because of how the math works.
I think it's important to point out for those districts that I think our colleague Dan Storch asked this question on a WASB webinar the other day, where he said, do I get to go to 11,000 and then get my 325 in the first year? The answer is no. And that's why we put this math out there. The 325 comes first, and then up to 11 as necessary, right? Yeah. You don't get an additional 325 in year 1, right? So
Lynette's
raising that.
Lynette's putting up some great info here. She confirmed that Lynette Edwards confirmed that it went up to 10,000 from 9,700 in the 21 school year, like you thought, Brian.
Thank you, WASBO board member Lynette.
Yeah, and she provided the link to the SAA blog post too that has the list of low revenue districts. So if anyone doesn't have access to that blog, email me and I'll send that to you.
All right. Now, Lynette is the business official in Ontario, Canada. We always tease her about that just because she's okay. Anything else on just these basic mechanics? This is something that is going to take a little explaining with your, with your senior leadership team and your school district, and with your board. Better to get them warmed up sooner rather than later. There are a lot of ancillary issues that come out of this, right? Having the revenue limit authority is different than actually exercising the revenue limit authority. That takes a vote of your board, and they're going to have to consider the needs of the school district and consider the tax levy impact. And the sooner they get their heads around that, the more likely they're going to make a good decision and not a snap decision. Okay.
Mike, one more comment on Act 141, and then we can move on from it. Act 141 still is in place. Thus, if you go to 10,500 this year, you go for a referendum in 2024 and it fails, you will not be able to go up to 11,000.
Yeah. Boy.
You'll be able to add on the 325, correct, Dan? But not.
Yeah. So something to think about if you're on the fence going to referendum, given this is still in place and we have a new $1,000 of extra authority potentially, something to think about whether you're going to referendum now or not.
Right.
Soon.
Well, I'm given a little time to digest this. I'm sure our business managers are going to figure out exactly the right timing on something like that. But thank you for bringing that up. Okay, I want to go on and deal with some of the other aspects, major aspects of the K-12 funding scenario. It's in the state budget, and that has to do with the private vouchers and other examples of payments made by school districts to support other flavors of education in the state. I think that I apologize. This slide is a little fuzzy. I want to. It's a copy from the legislative fiscal folks who did this originally, and it was. I think Dan Rossmiller used this in the WASB presentation a couple of days ago. So this shows the per pupil payments under the, I guess I shouldn't say proposal anymore, right? And this has already been.
Yep, this has been signed into law, this part. Yeah.
So
should we just back up a minute just on the process of how this all went down? So there are these two huge K-12 provisions, the low revenue adjustment, the low revenue ceiling increase, and then these big bumps to voucher and charter schools was all done in separate legislation that the governor already signed. And then now it gets sort of incorporated into the budget bill that was sort of wrapped up last night. So the budget bill stuff, when we get to the sort of categorical aid stuff and general aid, that's not signed into law yet, but these two big provisions are.
Got it. Okay, so let's take a look at these. The impact is driven mostly by whether or not you have these alternative school options in your district or in your regional area, and whether your residents are taking advantage of those, or if they qualify to. So private school choice K-8 per pupil payments, as you can see, it goes from $83.99 this year to $98.74, and then up to $10,271, an increase of about 22%. That's the K-8 picture. So if you have an elementary school and you're private elementary school that participates in the program, that's the number that's going to matter. You can see the increase in the 9-12, the high school side, was even more dramatic. from $9,045 up to $12,368, and then $12,765, a 41% increase. I saw that the principal or the director of one of the private high schools that participates in the program, I think he was in Milwaukee area, said it feels like Christmas Day. I thought, good for you. I rarely get to hear our, I don't get to hear school business managers say that very often. The special needs scholarship, similarly, very substantial increases, 18.1%. And independent charter schools, another very substantial increase, 27%. So I think, yeah, I'll just make one comment and I'll throw it open. I think that, putting aside the argument around the existence and the viability of these programs, I really don't want to get into that right now. I think that it's more, I think what got the attention of the public school community was, look at these percentage increases. These are super substantial. And the school districts are, getting, like in Brian's case, because he's not low revenue, maybe 2.5, 2.6% revenue growth.
Yep.
It's just the perceived disparity there, the perceived sort of prioritization of one over the other that's got most of the business managers' attention.
And can you just explain? I'm a little confused because I'm just reading in the papers. They're not showing the 12,000. How did we get to that number?
Yeah.
We're seeing 11,000 something.
Right. So, and by the way, just to a caveat of what I just said earlier, the provision to increase these payments is in law, but these numbers are still preliminary. The LFB put these together before it was final. I have some updated numbers that DPI put together based on more updated conditions. And so the numbers aren't exactly this, but the reason why the numbers are different in different places is because in current law, the payments to private voucher schools and independent charter schools are the statutory payment level, plus they're indexed to whatever increase the public schools get in their revenue limit per pupil and the per pupil dollar amount change in most categorical aids. So you sort of take the increase in all the categorical aids, except for a few, divide it by, membership, and that dollar amount, you add up those $2 amounts, the revenue limit and the categorical aid increase, and the private schools and independent voucher schools also get that. So it's a big bump for them. And so that's why, you're seeing the differences between what it gets covered in the news and maybe what's going to be in reality. Is that what you're asking, Brian?
Yeah, so that would be fair to say that, on our side of the house, that would be like us being able to go to 11,000 and then get the 325 on top of it this next year.
Yeah. And on top of, so in current law, that's what I just described was in current law. In the 23-24 school year, they will also get an extra indexing related to the low revenue increase. So they get an indexing increase related just to the base revenue limit per pupil, plus the low revenue ceiling increase, plus the increase in all the categorical aids. So that explains some of these numbers, and a lot of those numbers aren't finalized yet. So DPI's got some updated numbers from what you see here.
I think a lot of our work over the next year, one of the many, sort of threads of WASBO research work has to be looking at what the sort of average cost per pupil is for Wisconsin school districts versus these other options, and making sure that we're getting apples to apples comparisons there. There's just a lot of misunderstanding about that. The public schools have expenditures for transportation, for special ed, and other requirements like responding to open records that are just very different. And the argument of, well, public schools get this, then voucher schools should get this same amount. It's kind of overly simplistic. And it's not so much for me that the voucher schools deserve less. It's more like the public schools should have gotten more in this equation.
Right.
So for school districts, let's take the private school choice numbers. If you have a lot of students who are participating, there's two things that are going to happen, right? You're going to essentially lose aid because getting taken away and transferred out. You will have the option of levying to make up for that. So remember what we said in the prior slide. You're going to have the option to levy to use your revenue limit authority. That's going to drive property taxes. But then the items on this slide are also going to drive property taxes. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of using your budget modeling, figuring out your levy scenarios, and giving your board some options and some choices. Maybe you use some fund balance. Maybe I don't know what you could come up with, but managing that levy is going to be an interesting challenge. So a big win for the choice community. Okay.
Can I answer? I just want to answer a quick question in the Q&A. Someone asked about open enrollment. Open enrollment is also indexed in a similar way, but open enrollment, as far as we know, won't get the low revenue ceiling increase part of the indexing. So open enrollment will go up similarly. I don't know if we want to go into direct numbers, but it's going to be similar. Open enrollment regular and open enrollment special ed will have similar indexing.
Okay. So I interpret that as, like indexing related, like the 325 relative increase. I want to make sure if I were an audience member, I'd be like, okay, it's probably going to go up 3 or 4%. I don't know that that's mathematically absolutely true, but I'd like to verify it. We know that there's not a shocking increase in the open enrollment, public school open enrollment numbers. There's a modest increase, is probably as far as I should go, right? Okay. Anne?
Just somebody made a really good point in the Q&A that, like you're saying, Mike, this is going to be a communications campaign for sure for school districts. So because of the increase we actually did get some increase in the revenue limits, not what we needed by inflationary standards, but it is an increase, and there's low revenue. Then there's also the voucher. So the increase in your levy is going to be all mixed up between the impact of the vouchers and your own stuff, your own increases. So somebody made a good point that there's going to be a lot of explaining to do what's the real school district stuff and what's taxpayers are paying for in the private schools. Just to reiterate that. It's a good point.
Yeah. Years ago, we used to present the levy as a single number. Like, here's the levy, 50 million or whatever it might be, 20 million. I think now it's like, here's a levy for normal public school operations. Here's a levy increase related to, the voucher program. Here's a levy increase related to this, to that, the next thing. It's and then you come to a total.
Yeah,
Brian?
There are a couple more items that will affect the levy, and the personal property tax going away. That is something that helps us.
And also last night, the school levy tax credit. Should we get into that now or wait?
I just want to get the one other one, the high poverty aid now. It did go through JFC. I don't know if it went through the final bill, but they did nix that.
Yeah, but from what my understanding is, the high poverty money just gets put into general aid. So it goes into the regular general aid calculation. So it doesn't get cut. It just, the high poverty part got pulled out and put in as general aid.
Okay, great. Yeah. If you're not familiar with the high poverty aid, it's not really an aid, it's more of a tax credit.
Yeah.
If you're free and reduced percentages are over 50%, then you are eligible, and you would get a dollar amount based on that. And it would reduce your tax levy and substitute in some state aid for it.
Yeah.
You didn't get more money. It was more of a form of property tax relief, I guess you could call it.
That's exactly what it is. It affected 130 districts in 23.
But that, if you're a district that had a lot of that, I use Madison as an example. You lose that money, and you're not super eligible on the aid side. You could be losing your 50. You might get wiped out of that. You know what I mean? You're going to lose your 15% in equalization aid, and you're not going to get your high poverty, another driver of your levy. Okay, let's talk about the levy credit, and because we don't even have a slide on that because it was so late last night.
Yeah, it just got approved last night. Let me pull up the actual numbers. So last night was the legislature finished up everything, all the rest of the budget proceedings, and the two big items that affect K-12 education were the tax relief and general fund taxes. And so in one of the motions, they approved a school levy tax credit increase of $590 million over the biennium. So the idea behind that was to offset the huge property tax impact of the combined, of the voucher and low revenue legislation and the K-12 legislation combined. That was estimated at $647 million over the biennium. And so this school levy tax credit is $590 million. So that the idea there was to help offset that property tax impact, but it's going to hit different districts than the way property tax impact is hitting them. It's kind of equalization neutral. It goes to the districts that have the least, that depend the least amount on aid, that are the highest tax levy districts. So we'll see how it shakes out. And that's another huge piece of communication that districts are going to have to do. They may see some good property tax levy relief down the line. The payments are going to actually get moved up to May rather than December for 23-24, but you're going to have to levy for it first. And then later you'll see the impact of the school levy tax credit. So there's property tax relief in there, but it's a little complicated.
Okay, we're gonna have more time to work on this going forward. This is October work ultimately, but being able to explain to your board that this, beyond the levy, there are circumstances that affect the individual taxpayer based on this state budget. You have to look at the budget holistically and say, in addition to this levy conversation, there's the levy credit, which will show up ultimately on the property tax bills, which will help offset the school levy. And also, we might as well mention this. What about the personal income tax cut that they were discussing as recently as last night? Is this pretty?
Yeah, and that was approved by JFC.
And pretty big, right?
Yeah. So that was
3.5 billion.
It's 3.5 billion. Yep. And the way they did that was just by collapsing some of the tax brackets and I don't know how much detail we want to get into that.
I just want to make sure that, for business managers in front of a board, you have to paint the full picture, right? Don't just put up a 20% levy increase and say, well, that's the way it is. There's so much more to it. And I know nobody in the audience would ever do that. So, okay, just wanted to make sure that we got those on everyone's radar. There were some other categorical aid issues that I'm going to go through rather quickly, right? There's always this menu of other smaller changes, but they're important too. So let's take a quick look at them. Okay, so the first one is special ed. Where they're increasing the pot of money to achieve an estimated 33.3%. That could vary based on actual conditions. For me, as a follower of this, while I recognize that any state budget is going to have a mix of good news and bad news, for me, this is the single most disappointing issue for K-12 school funding. We made an argument. The governor did, the superintendent of schools did, that our funding of special ed was a significant policy concern. At what, 30% of actual costs getting reimbursed? We made almost an ethical or moral argument that it needed to be 60%, a doubling of their level that we were at. And then ultimately, in the way it came out in the budget wash, was a very, very modest increase, right? From maybe 30% roughly to maybe 33% roughly. I thought this was a big lost opportunity for K-12, especially when you got a state surplus.
Yeah, and the governor proposed 60%. The K-12 community was pretty united in asking for 60%. It would have helped voucher and charter schools as well, as we talked about with the indexing. It was kind of win-win. So yeah, I agree, Mike. That was a big one, big disappointment.
Okay, here's a few smaller ones, but they're important depending on where you are in the state. There's an increase here for the high-cost transportation aid. There's another increase down to line 3 on transportation aid, which is more generally applicable around the state. And then lastly, there's an increase in sparsity aid. Again, that's a little more targeted, but important to many school districts. So if you are in the categories to benefit from those aids, make sure that you track what's actually happening. A couple more, I think, well, one more. The school-based mental health. Yeah, I think a lot, about we have 421 school districts, right? The median size is 880 kids in a school district. The average is 1,200, but the median is 880. A lot of the smaller districts are at a real disadvantage whenever money is given out via competitive grants. Because all the big districts, and the well-heeled districts, they have more staff, they're better at it. I am glad to see that the mental health services is being converted into more of a aid, if you will, approximately $31 per pupil. But this has a real short shelf life, doesn't it?
This does not. This is a one-time increase.
That's what I mean. It's like, it's just here and gone.
Yep.
It's like, it has no shelf life, I guess is your point, right?
Yeah.
It's not like a recurring, so be careful. Don't tie, positions.
And it's only $12.25.
Yeah. So you get 2 years of $31 and it plummets again. So no. I don't think the state legislature is suggesting that the school districts will have solved all the school-based mental health programs in 2 years, but it's certainly the way they're funding it. All right. There's a few other odds and ends we should probably mention. And I've not followed this as much as I would wanted to. These are not, I don't even know if I can call them aids yet or whatever.
No, these are
date on these.
There were a few things that in the K-12 the K-12 package that JFC passed, and I think was just passed by the just passed through JFC. There's an early literacy supplemental appropriation, which just means they're setting it aside potentially to use for something. And it's there was a point made last night that there's a lot of money in this budget set aside as supplemental appropriations, which just means we don't know what we're going to do with it yet, and we don't know the terms of how it's going to be spent. So that's an issue. This $50 million for early literacy and reading is a little bit more concrete because there's a huge literacy bill that's going through the process right now, and it's getting closer and closer to getting passed. And it's been estimated to cost $50 million. So the idea is this supplemental appropriation will go to this reading bill that we've been hearing about. And then but the other supplemental appropriations, there hasn't been a lot of discussion about this $5 million for shared school district services. I don't know what the terms of that will be. Maybe someone else does. I don't know.
Okay. Can we go back to the early literacy one? So the companion bill, is that the one that has the third grade? It's kind of hung up on this idea of third grade retention.
Yeah, and that's been pretty much resolved. It's gone through, machinations in the two committees, and I think it's been passed on the floor in the Assembly, and it's not quite passed in the Senate, I believe is where it stands. And the governor's office and DPI and the committees in joint finance have all been working on getting it over the line. And so the third grade reading, holdback has been taken out because DPI and the governor said that's a no-go. So, so it's getting closer.
Okay, good. And yeah, the second one, this 5 million, many of you may recall this, that there was this study group, right, called the Shared Services Study Group. It sounded a little bit like, can you consolidate, can you share services between school districts? How do we find efficiencies, et cetera, et cetera. And that committee, I kind of lost track of it, frankly. I don't know if they issued a final report, but this seems like it's somehow related to that work of that committee.
Yeah, I think so. I didn't hear a lot of discussion about it. Yeah, we can look into that more.
Yeah, so these are just things that are out there. Be aware, folks, that you might be hearing more about these. Okay, so what happens next? First, let's talk about governmental approval processes, and then we can talk about business office. Brian, maybe you can help me with the business office side. And you want to take the state government action? Like, what's
next?
Yeah, how does this whole thing move forward?
Yeah, so now the next step is for it to move to the floor, for the full budget to move to the floor. We're not sure yet where it'll start. It'll either start in the Assembly and then go to the Senate, or vice versa, and then they both have to approve it. If there's any differences, then it'll go back, to the other one, and hopefully the differences will get resolved. The thought is it'll probably start maybe in the Assembly on Tuesday, go to the Senate on Wednesday, and give Thursday an option, go back to the Assembly if needed to wrap up loose ends. And then it'll go to the governor. And then the governor can decide to sign it as is, partially veto it with his partial veto pen, or veto the whole thing. The governor, as people have seen in the news, has said that he would veto a bill, or a budget bill that cuts $32 million from UW system, which was approved last night. The $32 million was, I think, put aside as a supplemental appropriation, maybe, so that UW system can get it back if they can prove they're using it for like workforce development purposes or something. So I don't know if that counts as a $32 million cut or not, as far as the governor is concerned. So we'll see. It's hard to know. The other thing is the tax cut last night. The governor has said he does not support the cutting the top tax bracket. So he could partially veto that. So that's sort of the next steps.
Okay, great. And on the business office side, let's see, Brian, we've got the July 1/8 estimate coming up, right?
Yep.
Probably a good time from July onward to start running. If you're using there's different budget models out there, there's different forecasting tools. Strongly encourage you to keep running those almost weekly, right? And super important to communicate with your leadership team and your superintendent, your board, as to how this whole thing is shaping up. Obviously, third Friday count is going to be a big deal. It always is. And then we're going to go into October, and then it's when all the real work happens. So it's going to be a busy start of the school year in the school business offices. A couple of closing notes, because we're almost out of time. First of all, thank you all for joining us this morning on Money Talks. Remember, all of you school business managers out there, you are the stewards of about $13 billion of state resources. That's important. You're in a position to make a great difference in your community. Keep doing the great work that you're doing. We're happy to try to support you at WASBO. If you are really new, there are PD professional development opportunities coming up soon. There's the Year of Success program to help you get started. It starts with the new administrator conference in September. So go to the WASBO website if you want to learn more about professional development. if you're relatively new to this work. So other than that, it is Friday, it is summer. And we did have a colleague years ago who created an adult beverage. It was a kind of a punch, and he called it Special Adjustment Aid, like AIDE, like Gatorade. It was called Special Adjustment Aid. And 2 drinks of that, and you believe me, you felt the special adjustment. So whatever your beverage of choice is, have yourself a great summer weekend, and we'll see you down the road.
Yes, and I do just want to, before we send everyone away, I know we had a ton of questions in the chat. We will be responding to those after the webinar. So don't worry if you didn't get your question answered, but thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ann. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, everybody.